Okay, we're recording again. It's Christmas Eve 2016, December 24th, and we are at New Braunfels. The last time we left off, we had talked about Mom and Dad, Mom finishing up or being the librarian at the Bourne Public Library, and Dad being the chief or the head of the pharmacy branch of the U.S. Army Medical Service Corps. Academy. Okay, and so now we're moving on to Dad's assignment in Korea and Mom moving to the public library. Let's start with the assignment in Korea, how that came about and what happened there.
Well, I'd spent, I guess, 4 years at the academy, so it was about time to move, but it was one of those things that the family had kids and we had kids in high school and Ruthie had a job, so we had had one overseas tour up to that point, and that was an accompanied tour in Okinawa in the 60s, 64, 65. So the opportunity to come up to take 13 months, I think, in Korea, and it was consultant to all of the U.S. forces, pharmacy consultant in Korea, so it wasn't a typical chief pharmacist job. We had the 121st Evac Hospital in Seoul, which was a standalone hospital, but then it had all of its equipment to deploy as a field hospital.
The year. Give me the year and approximate month when you went over.
Oh,
I think it was
60 or 83, 84. Is that?
Yeah, I said Chris graduated from high school. I thought it was 83, and she graduated from high school in 83.
No, because Dad had a Dodge truck, and Chris got to drive that when Dad was in Korea.
So she was a senior.
She must have been a senior then.
Okay.
It turned out to be a great tour. Jason Bradford come over and spent part of a summer with me. We got an apartment, had an apartment with another MSC officer off post, did our own cooking, had just a old Datsun vehicle that we had painted with spray paint, but it got us from the post around.
Spray painted orange, it looked like a taxi.
Orange, yeah, and there was a mechanic that, for a few dollars would keep it running, and it sort of went with the apartment. As you left, you turned it over to your replacement. Colonel Sider was the commander of the hospital, and I got to be good friends with him. We ran a lot. Sunday mornings, the hospital crew would come by the apartment, and we'd have juice and coffee and stuff, and then we'd run along the Han River between the bridges. Ruthie come over and visited
In February,
and that was a good tour. And then we had a major deployment with the Korean military where we set up the field hospital, and I was assistant director on that. And it was with the exception of being away from the family, it was a good tour. And I shopped a lot. That was, when you're over there and you're alone, your options are, drink too much or gamble too much or fool around. And basically what Pops did was I shopped and bought sake jugs and antique Korean chests and would park and walk through the little market. And it was really before the Olympics, so Korea was just an emerging nation, which was fun.
I want to hear about back on the home front.
Okay, well, my trip to visit was wonderful. It was Korea, Seoul was very interesting. horrible. What I remember about it was horribly polluted. The cars didn't have any kind of pollution controls on them. There was kind of a haze over the city. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
But it was fun to see. We went down to Busan.
Took the blue train down. Yeah.
And then we flew to Japan and spent a week in Japan and had a wonderful time. Got around, went from Kyoto up to Tokyo, then took a train, and it was February, snow everywhere, up to Nago, someplace in northern Japan. So we had a great
Stayed
trip.
in a ryokan with, mats on the floor, and it was... The people in Korea were really very friendly also. You could get out in the evening and walk the streets, and people were always smiling and waving, and it was just a good experience.
It is interesting how different people live, because in the U.S. you're so self-contained in your house with your family watching TV, and in Seoul in the evening, I guess after dinner, everybody was out walking the street and seeing the neighbors and chatting, and whole families were out. It was a little like, when I think about it, Madrid and Barcelona, because, I don't know, the Spanish people, when we were there, everybody, I think before dinner, because dinner was so late, but anyway, the streets were just packed with people.
But during that time when I was doing my stuff in Korea, you were home with essentially...
The three teenagers.
First, before I want to hear about that, but how old were you all? Was this early 40s? You were in your early 40s?
Yeah, if it was 82 and 83, we were 42 and 43.
Yeah. So back on the home front in San Antonio, you were...
It wasn't exactly a disaster, but I can remember thinking I was so self-sufficient and I could manage everything. And it was a lot harder than I thought. And I think you kids, or at least Chris and Jenny, thought I was a little bit crazy. Because I had the job, it was...
Was this Bernie or back at the city?
No, I was with the city of San Antonio. I was a branch manager, and the branch was 25 miles away, so I had another commute.
Which branch was it?
Johnston branch on the southwest side of San Antonio.
Okay.
It was very interesting. I had a great staff, except there was always a hiring freeze with the city of San Antonio, so we never had a full staff. And we were open like 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Friday, 9 to 6 on Saturday. So the hours were long, and I was working nights, which wasn't perfect, or working some nights with you kids. And we had the yard and the big house, and
so I would have been about, what, 7th or 8th grade?
Yeah, 7th and then 8th grade.
And then Jenny would have been, I guess, 9th, 10th?
10th, yeah.
And Chris would have been a senior, is that
Chris
about right?
was a senior, yeah.
Okay.
And Jennifer was going through part of her long rebellion, so she was always a handful. All these things, and the kids never got into real trouble. But when something happened, it was always when their father was gone, and there may have been a connection. But Chris was at a party, and it was in an area that was east of Windcrest that was unincorporated. There was a place, I don't know if you knew it, but kids used to go, some open land.
Robards.
Robards, that is what it was. And, of course, they were drinking. And she had not been drinking, but the police picked her up with everybody else. And I had to go to Universal City to get her out of police custody. Although they said that there was no evidence that she had been drinking, and she swore she hadn't been. And then Jennifer got picked up by some deputy sheriffs. And those kids had been drinking down near East Central High School. and I can't remember, you probably felt you had to be good, and you, I suppose, were in 7th and 8th grade, not as, you weren't out driving and stuff. But anyway, it was a very busy, event-filled year. And I was very glad to have those 2 weeks in Korea. And
What happened to the kids when you
Miss
Riggs
Riggs
came over.
one of the Jennifer and Jason's teachers, the Spanish teacher at the middle school,
Okay.
just moved into the house and took charge.
And were you at the Johnson branch even after Dad came back from Korea?
Yes, and I can't remember, later in the 80s, I moved because of, I think we talked about it, the issue with living within the city limits of San Antonio, which we did not do. I just felt very uncomfortable. Then they later, I think the state passed some kind of law that said cities couldn't require their employees to live in the city limits. So that was rescinded, and then at a later time I went back to the city, but was legal that time. But anyway, it worked out well. It was a hard year, but I think in the long run for you kids, for Jenny and you especially, when your dad could come back to the IG team, and he traveled, and that's another whole story, but it was good for the family. It gave we had that continuity that a lot of military families did not have. I didn't win you any friends in the military.
By staying.
By staying.
But when you came, anything else about Korea before coming back?
No, it was probably one of my best tours, because I'd travel up to the DMZ and visit the 1st Division aid stations up there and around the country and things. It was a good job. And then when the time to come back, I'd had 4 years at the academy. The family had been in San Antonio the 5th year, and the only job that was really open that was appropriate was the IG, Inspector General's office, and I was a lieutenant colonel then, so I came back as head of the inspections branch, as well as covered the pharmacy portions of the inspections. So there was a colonel in charge, and then a lieutenant colonel in charge of investigations, and then I was in charge of inspections. So I was the team leader on the inspections. The travel would be like, we'd go out 2 weeks every month and either do 2 station hospitals or 1 general hospital in that, and then we'd be back for 2 weeks. And then in December we'd do Brook, but for like 11 months out of the year it was gone part-time.
Well, 2 weeks, and I can remember, I mean, you'd come back, I suppose you'd write up the reports, but the 2 weeks that you were in town, you weren't horribly busy.
No.
A lot of the jobs your dad had were not 40-hour-a-week jobs. He'd be up and gone at 5:30 in the morning, and if you've got troops, you always have issues and things come up, and but that part of it was good, because for the 2 weeks that he was home, he had plenty of time to get the lawn done, and I don't know. It was, that part of it was good.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Outside of the travel, it was a interesting job. I went up to Chicago and cross-trained with the civilian organization that inspected and certified civilian hospitals, JCAH, Joint Commission on Accreditation of Hospitals. So when we do the Army hospitals, we'd do an IG inspection, and then they'd send in civilian inspectors with us. So of the various services, the only ones that were JCH accredited were the Army hospitals, and part of that was the staffing that met the Joint Commission standards in the Army. And I guess I was in that job for 2.5 years.
I guess we'd have to stop and
About that.
think. I think Jenny was going to be a senior, and she graduated in '86. We'd have to go back.
And
I thought it was longer than that.
could
but I
have been
guess-
3 years.
But
It put us in San Antonio for 4, 5, 7 to 8 years of my end of my military. It was all in family was in San Antonio, and that
I was there since second grade, so
Yeah.
it was, by that time it probably was 8 years, 7 or 8 years.
right.
And at the end of that tour, I was selected for promotion to 06 to full colonel. But what sort of went along with it was a couple of caveats. One, it looked like they wanted me to go into Walter Reed, which was the largest Army hospital, as assistant chief for a year, and then take over as chief, which would mean one relocation to Washington D.C. And I had been either a chief pharmacist or in charge of the inspection team or, countrywide consultant in Korea. I just was not wild about taking over a deputy position, and to remain maintain the 06 promotion, you had to serve at that time 3 years in grade to retire as an 06. So it would have been, and I had like 24 and a half years in at that time.
But you were only on the list, and the list was slow.
List was slow. Vietnam was over.
It would have been 4 or 5 years in D.C.
Yeah, it would have been my last assignment. And so I put in retirement papers and had always planned to teach at the School of Pharmacy in Austin. The assistant dean was my primary professor at the University of Wisconsin, Ken Kirk. And he'd always said, when you're ready to retire, give me a call. Well, I gave him a call, and he said, not a problem. We have a position opening up this fall. And this was January. And I thought, well, nothing before that. And he said, no, we're on hold and state employment and all that type of thing, but it's a good job. And we talked about the assistant professor and associate professor ranking, and if you go in at the assistant level, you're not exactly on a tenure track. And I was
Well, you got to get tenure.
Yeah, and I was in my mid-40s, and I'd published probably 25 pharmacy articles, because I knew that at some point there'd be an academic position coming up, and publishing is important. So I took what was going to be a temporary job with the Department of Health as a pharmacy inspector, and I didn't know anything. I don't think I'd ever been in a nursing home. But they had a position open where the team would inspect Medicare units in hospitals and nursing homes. And coming out of the IG, which was basically an inspection environment, it was just a different set of rules, the team, the checking, and it just turned out to be something I enjoyed. And the fall come around and we were settled in, and it would have meant a relocation to Austin, which wasn't been as traumatic as Washington D.C., but I liked what I was doing. So I stuck with the Department of Health for 17, 18 years as a pharmacy inspector of a nursing home and hospitals. And at that point developed the experience. So when I retired from the Department of Health, I'd had a lot of long-term care experience, and that's when Ruthie and I set up the Libby consulting business, which has worked out very well.
Yeah. before we get there, Mom, what about your library experience after the Johnson branch?
Then I went to Baptist as a medical librarian, which was at a time when the National Library of Medicine was really developing information programs for medical staffs and nurses. All of medical literature was being put, not the text, but the author's titles, subject headings were being input into computers so you could search very specifically for information.
And that was like the beginning of the internet, kind of.
And I forget what it was called,
Medical
ArmyNet or something. It was originally an Army network, Defense Department, maybe network. And Baptist was in a pretty good position at that time. They were expanding from Baptist Medical Center. They built Northeast Baptist and Southeast Baptist, and they had a hospital in the medical center, and then one out on the North Central. So
there were a couple of auxiliary smaller libraries in those main facilities
yes,
too. So.
Well, yeah, we set up small libraries in a couple of them.
But doctors would come and say, I'm getting ready to do a surgery, I need an article on...
Right, yes. Or I've had a complication, what can you find on X, Y, and Z? Or some new drug would come out that they didn't know a lot about. And Baptist had the nursing school and a med tech program and a radiology tech program. So there was the library was busy and there was lots to do. Oops, some noise in the background. So it was something that I enjoyed. The School of Nursing faculty, they just happened to be in my age group. We all had kids. That many of us had children that were in high school and going away to college. So it was a nice working environment.
Was that about the time that Jenny went through various training things but eventually ended up at the Baptist?
At Baptist, yes. And she had started out at SAC and was in a 2-year program in business technology. And she knew she needed to be in school. She wasn't wild about it. About that time, she got hired at Trinity. Our friend Ann Noble was director of continuing education, and Jenny had excellent typing and business skills, and she'd had the college background, and she does have a knack for getting along with people and was fit in with that group. About the same time, she had a good friend, Leslie, whose older sister had a premature baby. And that was Jenny's first real experience in a hospital. And I think the baby was at Santa Rosa for 2 or 3 months. And the family told the nursing staff that Jennifer was another sister. So she got in to see the baby along with the family. And she was so impressed with the nursing staff that I think that's when she decided...
was certainly a good fit at Baptist. That training program was, practical and academic and a lot of hands-on, and she did well.
Yes, she did do well.
Yeah.
Was in with a good group of students and made a lot of friends.
Older, I think.
Right, but then when she was at Trinity, she had to, there were 2 semesters worth of prerequisites, which of course...
Which were not easy, yeah.
No, but anatomy and physiology and a lab course. So she did that, and then when I was still at Baptist, she got into the nursing school. And it did work out well, and then you went to Trinity.
And wasn't the nursing school, it was somewhat subsidized if you went to work for them?
Yes, And I think there was some part of Medicare that could be used for education. But if you worked for them for 2 years, I think they wrote off the tuition.
And she was at Northeast Baptist after she graduated.
Yes, she got an internship job and then she worked there. You'd have to ask her for
Long
how
time.
long, that 12 or 14 years before she moved to Seguin.
How long were you at Baptist Hospital?
I went back to San Antonio Public Library
After Baptist?
after Baptist.
Just because you needed a change, or?
I did need a change, and it was the hospital was bought by a for-profit organization.
And libraries don't make a lot of money.
Libraries are a cost center but don't have income, and you could just see that things were changing. That they were going to cut people, cut staff, and it just felt like a good time to move. And I went back to San Antonio Public until 62, I believe.
Yeah.
So you were
No,
62.
I was 62, 2002.
Okay.
2002. So
So
how
I
long were
probably
you?
left Baptist in 98 or 99.
Okay.
And went back and worked at San Antonio Public and finished out.
But you were a consultant at that.
I was a consultant
So
to
small-
the
small
small public libraries. It was part of
okay.
the Texas State
And then
Library
you were
system.
traveling
and I was
around.
traveling to Del Rio and Eagle
Carrizo
Pass,
Springs. And,
Fredericksburg.
yeah.
Oh, that sounds like a good
So
job.
it was a good job.
So I don't forget, at some time during this time period, the 80s, late 80s, you started getting into gun shows. Tell me a little bit about that. How that came about and what it ended up in. And
You know, I had been interested in collecting guns, actually more than shooting and target work, and grew up on a farm, so did some hunting, and just started and built a collection, and then decided to do a gun show, and it was a lot of fun and made some money. And then since I was traveling all over the city checking nursing homes, I developed a number of pawn shops and sporting shops where they get used guns, and I'd buy them and I build up an inventory, and then got a federal firearms license. So the stuff I sold was legit as far as the federal regulations. And
it was about 1 or 2 weekends a month there for a while.
yeah, a long time. And I had a second pharmacy job in San Antonio, in Colorado, and in New Jersey, in addition to the military and in addition to Ruthie working. And the gun shows were actually a secondary source of income. I mean,
Because the kids were all in college, and we did have some college funds, but we had three, with Jenny on the long program, we had 3 of you in college, and really, financially, it filled a hole when we
yeah,
needed it, and I would go with you to the out-of-town shows.
we'd go to Houston, have some fun, go to a good Vietnamese restaurant, and
That's where Kim Son, wasn't it?
Yeah. So it was fun.
I was good at it.
Yes. Somebody said you could
Hypnotize them.
You hypnotized the people.
And you just get to read customers. They come up, they pick up a firearm, and there's a certain, they just fall in love with it, And so, and it was, we did it for, I guess, 10 years. Probably.
But you were very straight, always checked driver's licenses and did the paperwork. We paid sales tax, which was, kind of a pain, but we kept records.
And it was all cash, You didn't do credit cards, you didn't do checks. It was all cash, so.
You took some checks. The only place that we ever had trouble with checks was Austin. For some reason, if you did an Austin show, it should be no checks. Although the only good thing was whoever, I don't know if that was a district attorney in Travis County or whatever, we always got our money.
Never got stiffed.
We never got stiffed with a check.
And it was fun.
And at some point, you had to call in to do the background check, and you got one of the first bag phones.
Bag phones, you know, like a briefcase, you know.
And you'd put it in the center console of the Isuzu pickup or whatever small pickup you were driving. Yep.
But that
And
was
you
fun.
you did that really, I think, until the pawns became chains.
That
all
slowed
the
things down.
independent pawn shops were bought up, and they always, I mean, it was harder to do business with the corporations.
You
than
did it
had
through
been.
college, but I wasn't as involved really because I was in college, but you were kind of doing it on your own a little bit. And then it probably gradually started slowing down.
Right.
And it was a commitment. You would set up Friday night from 5 o'clock, and I'd get home at 6 or 7 o'clock Sunday night, and then do the paperwork till 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And we were doing like 2 shows a month.
No weekends.
Yeah.
Weekends.
Because there wasn't time off.
No.
It was basically setting up the gun show was work, and sitting through the gun show wasn't necessarily hard work, but it wasn't time off.
No, that's true.
No. Went through a lot of stuff. I think my first yellow sheet was 0001, and I think it was in my last sheet was above 7,000.
A lot of business.
Yeah. And you got involved.
Yep, when we got back from Germany, which is a whole other story, because at some point I graduated from college, and Chris had graduated from college and was working.
And you went to law school, and all of that fit. Certainly you and Trinity, and the military scholarship, and SMU. Chris always wanted to go to UT. Jenny ended up in nursing school. I don't remember a lot of discussion about you and Trinity. I think you took that early acceptance. So, you know, some of the challenges and stuff that kids are facing now, I don't remember going through a lot of that. We just sort of moved through it all and worked out very...
we did do the gun shows through law school.
Mm-hmm, that's right.
Yeah.
Because, I can't remember, but that was a period where we needed more income. And the
ROTC scholarship was
done.
Was done, exactly.
And the only other thing I want to say is with Jason and SMU and then going to Germany, with the kids in college, we hadn't traveled much at all for years.
And
really.
I had turned down multiple assignments to Heidelberg
I
and
know.
Frankfurt.
Yeah, I know, and maybe we didn't make the right decision, but we finally got to Germany, and it was kind of an eye-opener. I guess we had I had the Korea, Japan trip, but we really did love those trips. When we visited you twice in Germany and did some, traveling while we were over there. And it kind of reawakened our love of
And that's travel. And that's a good place to stop for today, because then we can talk about the consulting business and some of your
Kids travel and how all of that got started with
your
Neil in
travels,
New York.
your travels and
Yeah.
the kids' travels. That might be a good place
Yeah.
to start.
Right.
Okay.
Consulting, travels, kids' travels,
Okay.
retirement. And then that
Okay.
might be time to get it wrapped up. All right, we're out.